Your original title, 52 Aryan Brotherhood Prison, the Aryan Brotherhood, Psychology of Prison's Deadliest Gang. In the shadows of America's prison system, a hidden empire thrives, organized, loyal, and deadly. This is the Aryan Brotherhood, feared by guards, rival gangs, and even other inmates. But it's not just violence that makes them dangerous. It's the psychology of power, loyalty, and control that fuels every move behind bars. Today, we go inside the mind of America's deadliest prison gang and uncover how the system itself shapes their world. This documentary contains descriptions of prison conditions and violence for educational purposes based on verified sources. Viewer discretion is advised. For more deep research of prison documentary like this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Born in the 1960s California prisons, the Aryan Brotherhood began as a small group of white inmates banding together for protection. Over decades, it evolved into a sophisticated network, controlling violence, drugs, and influence across multiple states. What makes them truly terrifying is not just their criminal acts, it's the mental code they live by, the loyalty they demand, and the fear they instill without ever stepping outside the prison walls. This is a story not just of crime, but of psychological survival, manipulation, and power, inside a system designed to control men but often strengthens the gangs that dominate it. Origins, ideology, and the prison mindset. The Aryan Brotherhood formed at a time of racial tension and prison overcrowding. Initially, white inmates needed protection from rival gangs, but survival quickly gave way to strategy. The Brotherhood developed strict hierarchies, secret codes, and an enforcement system that demanded absolute loyalty. Their ideology combines racial supremacy myths with a rigid prison code, obedience without question, loyalty above all, and an unspoken rule that betrayal is deadly. Research from the Federal Bureau of Prisons identifies them as one of the most organized and violent security threat groups in the U.S. prison system. Psychologically, membership offers both identity and protection. Inmates adopt the gang's symbols, tattoos, and behaviors not just to intimidate, but to survive in a system that strips away individuality. Each act of obedience reinforces belonging, while defiance risks isolation, an almost unbearable punishment in prison life. By understanding their mindset, how fear, loyalty, and identity intertwine, we see why the Aryan Brotherhood persists, even under extreme supervision. They are not just a gang, they are a psychological system built to endure. Recruitment, indoctrination, and control. Joining the Aryan Brotherhood is never casual, it's a calculated process. Potential members are carefully observed over weeks, sometimes months. Guards, rival inmates, and even fellow gang members watch for behavior that signals loyalty, toughness, and adaptability. A single misstep can mean rejection, or worse, permanent suspicion. Recruitment is both psychological and social. Inmates are drawn not just by fear, but by the need for identity and belonging in an environment designed to strip them of both. Studies from the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, CDCR, note that gangs often provide a sense of structure, protection, and social status inside prisons that would otherwise be impossible to achieve. Once identified as a candidate, the induction is deliberate. Mentorship by senior members teaches the gang's code, symbols, and hierarchy. Tattoos are not just decoration, they are badges of loyalty, signals of rank, and warnings to others. According to Federal Bureau of Prisons reports, these marks serve as both a psychological anchor for the member and a visible reminder of the gang's omnipresent control. Psychologically, the Aryan Brotherhood uses a system of reward and subtle coercion. Compliance brings protection, acceptance, and status. Small violations are corrected socially through isolation, ostracism, or intimidation, without immediate violence. This careful balancing of fear and reward ensures obedience while minimizing exposure to law enforcement scrutiny. Harvard criminology research shows that structured peer control like this is one of the most effective ways to maintain loyalty in high-stress environments. What makes the Brotherhood particularly resilient is the internalization of its values. Members begin to think of the gang not as an organization, but as a personal identity. Psychological studies by Craig Haney and Shad Maruna indicate that once identity and survival merge, leaving the gang, even when possible, is almost impossible. Fear, loyalty, and belonging intertwine to create an almost self-sustaining system. Even minor acts, like following movement rules in the yard, speaking with the right people, or showing deference to senior members, are psychological tests. Every gesture reinforces hierarchy and control. The Brotherhood doesn't just demand obedience, it trains inmates to desire it, ensuring the gang's survival even under extreme supervision. In the next chapter, we'll explore the psychological consequences of this environment, how it shapes behavior, and why even the most intelligent inmates become fully indoctrinated, sometimes without even realizing it. Psychological consequences and behavioral conditioning. Life inside the Aryan Brotherhood is as much mental as it is physical. The gang doesn't just enforce rules, it reshapes the mind. Inmates learn to anticipate threats, calculate risks, and perform loyalty rituals constantly. Over time, these behaviors become ingrained, forming a cognitive framework where survival and allegiance are inseparable. According to research by Craig Haney and the National Institute of Justice, inmates in highly organized gangs develop a heightened situational awareness and social intelligence. Every interaction becomes a test: who can be trusted, who respects hierarchy, and who might be a threat. For members of the Brotherhood, even casual gestures can carry meaning, interpreted, remembered, and acted upon. This conditioning has deep psychological consequences. Members report a strong sense of identity tied to the gang, but also constant stress. The fear of betrayal, punishment, or social ostracism creates hypervigilance, a state where the mind is always on alert. Harvard research on prison psychology notes that prolonged hypervigilance reshapes thinking patterns, reinforcing the gang's values and behavioral norms. Real inmate stories reveal the subtlety of this conditioning. One former member described how simply following yard rules, observing senior members' interactions, and completing small tasks correctly became a mental ritual. Disobedience, even unintentional, could lead to weeks of social isolation or suspicion. Over time, members internalize these rules, making the gang's ideology a part of their thought process. But the Brotherhood's influence doesn't stop inside prison walls. Members maintain external networks, coordinating criminal activity, communication, and recruitment outside the facility. This dual-layer system, internal psychological control and external operational influence, creates a sense of omnipresence that reinforces obedience and fear. Psychologists note that this level of control demonstrates a form of learned dependence. Inmates begin to rely on the gang not just for protection, but for identity, purpose, and mental structure. Leaving becomes nearly impossible as the outside world offers no similar framework, no substitute for the complex social and psychological ecosystem they've been trained to navigate. Tactics of power and enforcement. The Aryan Brotherhood maintains control not through chaos alone, but through a structured system of power and psychological enforcement. Every member understands their role, every gesture carries meaning, and every interaction is a test of loyalty. This system transforms fear into order and obedience into habit. Hierarchy is everything. Leaders, often serving life sentences, wield influence far beyond their cells. They issue directives, manage recruitment, and monitor compliance through subtle observation. Senior members act as both mentors and enforcers, blending guidance with implicit threats. The goal is not just obedience, it is internalized compliance, where members police themselves without direct supervision. The gang also relies on social signaling and symbolic enforcement. Tattoos, clothing, and even hand gestures communicate status and allegiance. Missteps, even small ones, are noticed immediately. Research from the CDCR indicates that in tightly organized gangs, these social cues function as a nonviolent enforcement mechanism, reducing the need for overt aggression while maintaining fear and respect. Psychologically, these tactics create a perpetual state of accountability. Members learn to constantly evaluate their own behavior and that of others. Peer pressure, mentorship, and the ever-present awareness of surveillance combine to ensure the gang's rules are followed automatically. Harvard and APA studies on prison gangs show that such structured systems are far more effective than relying solely on intimidation or punishment. Outside the prison, the Brotherhood extends its control through networks of influence, coordinating criminal activity, maintaining loyalty, and sending subtle signals back into the prison system. This dual-layer structure, internal enforcement and external reach, ensures the gang remains resilient even under extreme scrutiny by authorities. The Aryan Brotherhood's tactics demonstrate a key psychological principle. Control is most effective when it becomes self-enforced. Members are trained to think, act, and even fear in ways that perpetuate the gang's ideology long after they join. This is why the Brotherhood survives despite decades of crackdowns, transfers, and federal oversight. Internal conflicts and loyalty tests. Even in a gang as disciplined as the Aryan Brotherhood, human psychology creates tension. Loyalty is demanded, but the individual instincts of survival, fear, and ambition sometimes collide with the rigid rules of the organization. These moments reveal cracks in the Brotherhood's seemingly unbreakable structure. Members are constantly tested. Loyalty is assessed through subtle actions: who follows orders, who reports infractions, who stays silent during conflicts. These tests are not always explicit. They can be as simple as observing whether a new recruit defends a senior member, or whether an experienced inmate maintains proper deference during yard interactions. According to Federal Bureau of Prisons reports, such tests are a critical tool in maintaining cohesion. Conflict is inevitable. Rivalries between members, competition for status, and differing interpretations of the gang's code can all lead to internal tension. The Brotherhood's response is strategic. Rather than immediate violence, social pressure, isolation, and calculated reassignments are used to enforce compliance. Studies from Haney and Irwin show that in high-control environments, social correction is often more effective than physical punishment in maintaining long-term obedience. Psychologically, members learn to navigate this web of expectations constantly. Every word, gesture, and even eye contact can signal allegiance or betrayal. This creates a form of cognitive vigilance, where inmates internalize the gang's rules so completely that their thought patterns align with the organization's objectives. Harvard criminology research shows that such internalization is what allows prison gangs to survive decades of oversight and enforcement. Real stories from former inmates reveal the mental toll. One ex-member described how a single misinterpreted gesture could trigger weeks of suspicion. Another recounted the stress of balancing personal survival against the gang's strict loyalty expectations, showing that even in a tightly controlled system, human psychology introduces unpredictability. Understanding these internal conflicts is key to understanding the Aryan Brotherhood, not just as a violent gang, but as a complex psychological ecosystem where loyalty, fear, and identity collide. External influence and survival strategies. The Aryan Brotherhood's influence does not end at the prison walls. Inmates maintain carefully coordinated networks that extend into the outside world, managing operations, maintaining loyalty, and even enforcing the gang's code beyond the facility. Federal Bureau of Prisons reports describe these external connections as a major factor in the gang's resilience, allowing them to survive crackdowns and high-security transfers. Communication is subtle but effective. Trusted associates relay messages, coordinate activities, and ensure that the gang's hierarchy is respected even when leaders are incarcerated. Every interaction is measured, every order precise. Psychologists studying gang networks highlight this as a form of distributed control, where the influence of key members radiates across multiple layers without requiring direct supervision. The Brotherhood's survival strategy is also rooted in adaptability. Members learn to read changes in prison administration, rival gang movements, and law enforcement tactics. Harvard and NIJ studies emphasize that this cognitive flexibility, the ability to anticipate threats and adjust behavior accordingly, is a core reason why organized gangs persist in highly controlled environments. Psychologically, this dual-layer system, internal control inside prison and external influence outside, creates a reinforcing loop. Members' loyalty, fear, and identity remain anchored in the gang, while the broader network provides purpose, resources, and authority. Former inmates note that even after years behind bars, leaving the gang becomes nearly impossible. The external network continuously exerts influence on decisions and allegiances. These survival strategies are not only about criminal operations, they are about psychological dominance. By combining strict internal hierarchy, loyalty enforcement, and external networks, the Aryan Brotherhood ensures that its members are both controlled and committed, forming a system that can endure decades of oversight and imprisonment. Psychological breakdown and long-term effects. Life inside the Aryan Brotherhood is not just about survival, it is about mental transformation. Years of rigid hierarchy, loyalty tests, and constant vigilance leave a lasting imprint on the mind. Psychologists from Harvard and the University of California note that prolonged exposure to such high-pressure social systems can create deep cognitive conditioning, altering thought patterns, stress responses, and social behaviors. Members develop a heightened sense of risk awareness and social calculation. Every interaction is a potential test of allegiance. Studies by Craig Haney show that this chronic hypervigilance can result in long-term anxiety, altered perception of trust, and a dependence on the gang for identity and purpose. In essence, the Brotherhood becomes a mental framework, a lens through which every choice, every relationship, and every thought is filtered. Real stories from former inmates highlight the duality of this transformation. Some describe a sense of belonging and purpose they could not find elsewhere, while others recount a persistent fear of betrayal, isolation, and the consequences of minor missteps. The psychological cost is immense. Members must constantly navigate loyalty, fear, and identity, even decades after joining. This long-term conditioning also affects relationships outside prison. Former members often struggle to adapt to life beyond the walls, carrying the mental and social frameworks of the Brotherhood into the outside world. Social reintegration becomes complicated. The gang's identity continues to influence decision-making, alliances, and perception of threat long after incarceration. Yet despite these pressures, the Brotherhood endures. Its resilience lies not in physical power alone, but in its ability to shape minds, enforce obedience, and maintain loyalty across generations. Psychological control becomes self-reinforcing, ensuring the survival of the gang even under extreme scrutiny from law enforcement. Broader implications and conclusion. America's prison gangs don't stay inside the prison walls. That's the uncomfortable truth most people never hear. The Aryan Brotherhood, like every major prison gang, began as a survival mechanism inside an overcrowded, under-resourced prison system. But over decades, it evolved into something far more influential. A shadow structure that affects rehabilitation, public safety, and the psychological climate of entire correctional systems. And the hardest question experts ask is this: if a prison environment creates the conditions for ultra-loyal, high-control gangs, how do you dismantle the gang without changing the environment? Researchers like Haney and Irwin warned for years that extreme isolation, lack of programming, and racial tension make inmates more vulnerable to rigid group identities. These aren't excuses, just psychological explanations that help us understand why these groups keep resurfacing generation after generation. Because when someone enters prison with no control, they turn to the only structure offering certainty. And gangs, especially ones as organized as the AB, provide that certainty with relentless discipline. Rules, roles, purpose, identity. This means the real battle isn't only about law enforcement or suppression. It's about understanding the human need that gangs exploit. The need for safety, the need for belonging, and the need for predictability, and the need for identity. Remove those vulnerabilities, and the gang loses psychological power. States that invested in evidence-based rehabilitation programs, conflict resolution training, and mental health interventions saw measurable reductions in gang dominance inside facilities. Not elimination, but real weakening. Because psychology cuts both ways. The same mind that can be shaped into loyalty for a gang can also be reshaped towards stability, accountability, and growth. And that leads to the bigger implication. Every prison gang story is ultimately a story about the system that produced it. If the system remains the same, the cycle continues. If the system shifts, the psychology inside shifts too. The Aryan Brotherhood's history is a warning, not because of the violence they caused, but because of the psychological vacuum they filled. A vacuum created by fear, by isolation, by survival instincts pushed to their limit. Changing what grows inside that vacuum may be the key to changing everything. This story is only one piece of a much bigger picture about prison psychology in America. If you want more deep, fact-based documentaries that break down how these hidden systems really work, make sure you don't miss what's coming next. Subscribe right now. Drop a comment telling me which prison or gang you want exposed next. And share this documentary if it opened your eyes to a side of the system most people never see. More powerful stories are on the way. Stay safe, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next documentary.